Joining me now, Texas Congressman Michael Burgess, who sits on the House Rules Committee. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
So let's begin with what happened yesterday. The Senate and the House, you both met for a whopping total of almost 4 minutes. You were on the floor of the House. Tell us what transpired.
Well, I was in Washington because we'd been told last week that the House would come back into session on the 27th, so I wanted to be certain I was here. I am a member of the Rules Committee, and any bill that's going to come to the floor has to come through the Rules Committee first. But apparently no deal had been reached, and as a consequence, both houses gavelled in and gavelled out relatively quickly. You
know, seeing something like that happen, it really is frustrating for Americans because we know that we have this shutdown going on right now. We're talking about moving it into, the new year when Democrats will take over the House. Why can no work get done, and why are we at this point to begin with?
Well, two things, and you go back a week ago, the Senate, and I didn't really consider this a profile in courage, but on a voice vote, on unanimous consent, sent the House an 8-week continuing resolution. Didn't have any money for the wall, didn't have any disaster relief money in it. We received that up in the Rules Committee 10 o'clock Wednesday night. The expectation was we would simply rubber stamp it and send it down to the floor for a vote. But the 7 members who were on the Rules Committee that night looked at each other and said, "This is not acceptable. We can't do this."
And what was
really
that, though?
First time in my experience that we've come out of the Rules Committee without passing a rule. The next morning, the president called the speaker down to the White House, and we had then obviously a different trajectory. And here, for me, this has been the frustrating thing. We then did come to the floor with a rule that had funding for the disasters, funding for the border wall, and it passed 217 to 185. Now, Nancy Pelosi had told the president a week before she taunted him. You don't have the votes to pass this. Well, in fact, they did, and I wish our speaker had understood that as well as most of the rest of us
did.
My question. We really wanted to pass this.
So here's my question. Is it just Democrats, or are there also Republicans there that don't want to get the work done?
Well, clearly in the House of Representatives, there are only 2 Republicans who were there that day who voted against it. So I would say the Republicans were very unified on this. The difficulty then,
but the Senate sent you something that didn't have any funding for the wall.
Yeah, right. And then the Senate did have a vote, said motion to proceed, and they allowed that to go forward, and that's when they adjourned. So my feeling is this is so important. This is an emergency. This is our southern border. This is the defense of our nation. The 60-vote rule, the filibuster rule in the Senate should be suspended to allow this appropriations bill to go forward and send it to the president and give him the money he needs. Let's get the government back open again, but let's also protect our southern border because that's critically important.
But Nancy Pelosi has made it pretty clear that she's not willing to negotiate, even if Chuck Schumer, as some have said this morning, appears to possibly be open to some sort of negotiation. The Democrats have gone home.
The dislike for the president is so intense on the Democratic side. I do not think her rank and file really allows her the freedom to do that. But here's the problem. Yes, they will take over in a week's time. Yes, Mr. McGovern is quite correct. They can pass a bill that sends over to the Senate the clean continuing resolution to open the government. The president will veto it, and he should veto it, and we will sustain his veto.
Well, Congressman Burgess, thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully some work can get done. Thank you.
You.
With a